love to have special guests around here. David Roth used to come and sing that song, but now he's got some competition, I think. I hate it when guys do my songs better than I do. But I want to tell you, the person we have here today is a very special guest because he's dedicated his life for the past 100 years. I don't know. Ever since I have known about A Course in Miracles, I've known about Jon Mundy. He's the editor of Course in Miracles magazine. He has 10 books that he has written and published, all aimed towards helping us remember who we are and live in the miracle. There's a whole table full of his materials out there. I hope you all can take some of them home, so you can take a bit of Jon home with you. He's not only a teacher of A Course in Miracles, he's a teacher of mysticism. He's a teacher of spirit. He's a true spirit-led presenter, teacher, author, and all-around good guy. Jon Mundy.
Thank you, brother. Morning. Thank you, Tony. It's really nice to be back on the Cape. Actually, my wife Dolores is here. Honey, do you mind saying? She doesn't usually come around. I know I'm embarrassing you, but... Dolores doesn't usually travel with me, but when I said I was coming up here, and she said I always wanted to go to Nantucket. She'd read Moby Dick and all that, and so we spent the last 4 days on Nantucket, which was kind of fun before coming over. So it all tied together very nicely. And thank you, Jack and Oriana. That was very nice. You did do a good job with that. That's great. And I also want to thank our Christina Young, who was our hostess last night and this morning, for letting us stay at your house. And, a good friend, Patricia Conti Nelson, back there in the back row, who is a graduate of our seminary in New York City, All Faith Seminary. So. And a really good friend. We do have a workshop this afternoon from 12 until 2, right? Just 2 hours, and it will go like that. So come if you can. I guess we'll have 45 minutes or so for some refreshments downstairs, and then come back up. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different today. This is not going to be a heavy-duty sermon. In fact, are you ready to laugh a little bit? Yes. Oh, okay, good. Well, there's no laughter in this first part, but I hope that before the morning's off, you're going to get a few good ones in, okay? All right, let's see what we can do. The title of this message for this morning is Remembering to Laugh, the Healing Power of Humor. And I want to start with a passage from A Course in Miracles. This appears very near the end of the Course, like chapter 29 or 31 chapters. But it's an interesting little passage. It's often referred to. It goes, into eternity, where all was one, there crept a tiny, mad idea, at which the Son of God, now the Son of God, that's you, that's me, that's everyone, at which the Son of God remembered not to laugh. So we should have laughed at this really silly, ridiculous idea. And the silly idea is that it's possible to be separated from God. It's not possible to be separated from God. But just for a moment, you, me, we, humanity, mankind, Adam and Eve, thought this thought. And depending upon how you'd like to view historical time, for the past tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or more years, several billion of us have been trying to think the same thought. Now to go on with that same quote, it says, it is a joke. The Course says it's a joke to think that time could come to circumvent eternity, which means there is no time. Now, if you come to the workshop this afternoon, I'll explain that last part. Right now, I don't have time. That's one. Okay. That's two. And 3. Okay, I'll stop that. What is a joke? A joke is a little story. And it's a little story that has an interesting last line. We call that last line a punchline, because there's something about that last line that sort of flips everything around backwards, and it causes us to laugh. There's a kind of incongruity in it, and we get to laugh at life a little bit because we see the incongruities of life. I hope you do that. Catch yourself doing that once in a while. Many, many years ago, I had an inn that I owned. Was silly. But anyhow, I would always take the water that was left from the ice tray at night and dump it on the flowers. And one night I run out, it's pouring rain, and I'm watering the flowers. So you got to say to yourself, wow, you got to laugh. You're watering flowers in the rain. Okay. That's what I mean about the absurdities of things like that. So it says in the Gospels that Jesus always taught using parables. Isn't that right? Always. Use the word always. In fact, it says he never taught without using parables. What's a parable? A parable is a little story. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus was telling jokes, but I bet you there were some good last lines. I'll give you an example of the power of a last line. It's not a joke, but it's one of Jesus' parables. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. We know that story. It's such a good story, it's used at Sunday schools as an illustration, right? So the way that joke happened, Jesus just got through saying we should love our neighbors as ourselves. And a lawyer, it's always a lawyer, right? A lawyer raises his hand and asks a question. Please define for us this word neighbor. See, lawyers, they want definitions. What do you mean by neighbor? So Jesus answers by telling the story of the Good Samaritan. And after he tells the story, you know the story. A guy gets beat up along the road. 3 people come by. The first 2 walk around him. The third one stops and takes. And it happens to be a Samaritan who were not among the more respected of the people. And so the last line of the parable is, now who proved to be a neighbor to that man? Well, the answer is so obvious, it didn't even need a response on the part of the lawyer. Right? Our best teachers in the course of history have actually been storytellers. Right? People like Davy Crockett and Will Rogers and Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. It's interesting. If you go online, there's been a thing I noticed on who are we graded as our best presidents, all the way from the bottom up to the number 1. And guess who always comes up as number 1, right? Abraham Lincoln. Why else would ever? And Abraham Lincoln, the fact is he was told so many stories that he got criticized for telling so many stories. In the New York Herald, here, this is a quote from Lincoln. They say that telling stories lowers the dignity of the presidential office. But I find that people are more easily influenced by a broad, humorous illustration than in any other way. And what the hypocritical few have to say, I don't care. So that's Abraham Lincoln for you, right? I mean, he would just, that's a good way. And it also, I have another new book out there that's called A Course in Miracles, and it's an anthology. I wrote the section on Zen Buddhism. One of the things that happens in Zen Buddhism is the use of koans. And koans are little stories, and one of the purpose of a koan is to get you up to an aha. Or actually, if you really read it, it's an aha. You really get the irony that's involved in the whole thing. Right? Many years ago, when I was in seminary back in 1960, I wrote a paper on the humor of Christ for a class I was taking, and I read a book written by Alton Trueblood, who was a theologian, and it was also on the humor of Christ. And he tells the story about one day he was reading the Bible to his young son, and all of a sudden the boy started to laugh. Well, it occurred to him, why did the boy laugh at the passage? He just had to look. What did he just read that caused the boy to laugh? Well, he just read the passage that said, why are you so concerned about a speck in somebody else's eye when there's a beam blocking your own vision? Well, that must have struck the little boy as ludicrous, like a cartoon character with the beam sticking out of his eye, So he laughed. So that caused him to think there was probably a lot of humor in, right? And so he found some. And it's really this kind of ironies. Pearls before swine, good old wine, stuff like that. So, as I said, I love ironies. I don't know about you, but here's some example of some ironies. They found that a friend of mine, Steve Behrman, has said if there's a disease in our culture today, it's irony deficiency. Now, seeing a doctor will not cure you of irony deficiency, but seeing a paradox will. I love ironies, like the story of the soldier who was being flogged, and all through the flogging he kept laughing and laughing and laughing. And the guy said, "Why, you idiot, why are you laughing?" He says, "Because you're the idiot, you're flogging the wrong guy." Right? And here's some examples of irony. Why do they sterilize needles before giving lethal injections? And why is something as clean as a whistle? Do you know how dirty a whistle is? Right? Why doesn't Tarzan have a beard? Think about that, right? One evening I was watching a commercial on television. It was for Velveeta cheese. At the end of it, it said, "Accept no substitutes." Think about that. Somebody out there is creating artificial Velveeta. Right? So probably one of the best illustrations we have of the healing power of humor, some of you may know of Norman Cousins, who a number of years ago was diagnosed with having an incurable disease. So he decided that seeing how he was going to go out, he would just go out laughing. So he got a lot of Marx Brothers movies and candid camera reruns, and he just started watching. He started laughing and laughing and laughing, and he got well. Well, after this, doctors began to study the healing power of humor because they knew that it worked in practice. The question was, did it work in theory? Now, what they found out was that when we laugh, it causes our blood vessels to dilate, which is much better than having them die early. So, gets better. Here's just a list, a few of the things that laughter does for you physically, just physically. It increases the heart rate, stimulates circulation, works the diaphragm, increases production of hormones that release natural painkillers. It works the abdominal walls. How many of us need a little work done on our abdominal walls? Okay, right? In some African cultures, they actually they think mourning is natural, but if it gets protracted, then it's unnatural. So they actually assign to somebody who's mourning too much what they call a joking partner to help them try to bring them out of their overburdening grief, right? So that's just some of the things that it does. Psychologically, humor opens up lines of communication. It relieves pressure by providing safety valve for the release of pain and emotion, stimulates problem solving, provides a natural release for tension. It can even stop hostility and anger. A study has shown that the best run offices in America are the ones in which there's a sense of joviality and kidding amongst the employees. And guess what? What the worst run offices in America are those in which there's a sense of hostility and anger going on amongst the employees. Here's just one example of the use of humor as a release of tension. I've got a couple. These are good ones. First was a story about Adele Roberts, who was a police officer in San Francisco. And she got a summons to go to someone's house because the next door neighbor called and said, "There's a lot of loud fighting going on next door. I think you should investigate." So they send Adele Roberts out. She's walking up the steps to the house, And just as she's approaching the door, a TV comes crashing through the front window. She knocks on the door. A really rough voice from inside says, "Who is it? Who's there?" She says, "Police officer." And rather than saying police officer, she said, "TV repairman?" Now, laughter came from inside that house. And it set the scene for the release of all that anger that was going on. And this is even a much, much better story. This is told by John Kenneth Galbraith, who some of you may know. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Some of us can remember. October 1961, a lot of tension in this country because we were concerned that we might be on the verge of a nuclear war. And they were having a meeting in Washington, D.C. between Russian delegates and American delegates trying to work this out. And nobody was talking. They were all just sitting there with their arms crossed. And a Russian delegate raised his hand. And he says, "Why don't we go around the room, everybody tell a joke?" He says, "I'll go first." He says, "What's the difference between communism and capitalism?" The answer is that under communism, man exploits man, and under capitalism, it's the other way around. Now, an explosion of laughter occurred in that office building, and who knows, that explosion of laughter may have prevented another explosion which would have had devastating consequences for this entire planet. So we have to remember, Course in Miracles advises us, projection makes perception, and sometimes the problems that you see out there in the world just might be your own. There's a story about a guy who's talking to his doctor, and he says, "I think my wife Gertrude's getting hard of hearing." He says, "Send her in, I'll give her a checkup." "I don't know," he says, "she's a very proud woman. I don't think she's just going to voluntarily come in on her own." He said, "You could do a checkup yourself. Go home. Stand about 20 feet away from her. Say something in a moderate tone of voice. See if she hears you. If she doesn't, say to walk up to 10 feet away from her. Say something in the same tone of voice. See if she hears you. Just see how close you got to get before she hears what you say." He says, fine. He goes home. He opens the door. When he opens the door, he sees Gertrude is standing with her back to him, cooking something on the stove in the kitchen. He's about 20 feet away. So from that vantage point, he says, "What's for dinner?" Doesn't hear a word coming from Gertrude. Walks over to the kitchen door. Now he's about 10 feet away. Same tone of voice, he says, "What's for dinner?" Doesn't hear a word coming from Gertrude. Walks right up behind her, and he says, "What's for dinner?" She turns around, she looks at him, and she says, "For the third time, chicken!" So you see, the problem you think belongs to somebody else just might be your own. And I just heard this one. This is so new. I've not even used it before, except I shared it with Dolores. There's a man who's dying in his home, and he's laying there in bed. He knows he's dying. He knows it's pretty soon, a day or two, he's probably going to be gone. And suddenly this wonderful odor, this smell comes drifting into the bedroom. It's his very favorite smell. It's the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking. So with all of his might, he sits up in bed. And he puts his feet on the side of the bed. And he gets a hold of his walker. And he goes out in the hall, and he walks down the hall to the kitchen. And he goes in, and he sees that his wife is cooking chocolate chip cookies. And there's a tray out cooling on the table. And he goes over, and he reaches out to get one of the cookies. She turns around, she sees him, she slaps it, and says, "Those are for the funeral." It is a good one. Dolores likes that because, whenever we have a party, I'm always trying to get into the hors d'oeuvres before the company arrives. Right. So there's a lot that we can think about what we're always thinking about in projections. There's a story about 4 ladies who are playing cards in a retirement home down in Florida. And a handsome-looking older gentleman that they've never seen before comes walking into the room. They all sit up a little prettily, and the first one says, "You're new here, aren't you?" He says, "Yes, I just moved in this morning." The second one said, "Where'd you come from?" He said, "I came from San Quentin prison." Third one says, "What were you there for?" He says, "I killed my wife." Fourth one says, "So, you're single?" That goes over real good in Florida. So I taught for college classes for 40 years from 68 until 08. And one of the courses I taught was called World's Views and Values for Marist College. And one of the textbooks was called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Some of you probably know Man's Search for Meaning. It sold over 4 million copies, which is a lot of books to sell. And I reread that the last time I taught the class. And, Viktor Frankl was one of the survivors of Auschwitz. He's one of the very few people that walk out of there. And actually, he developed a form of therapy called logotherapy, which was designed to people find meaning in their lives. And he told the story. He said, even in Auschwitz, they had very, very few tools, just very, very few tools. But one of the things that a few people still had, despite of their circumstances, was humor. And if it got them out of their situation, even for a few seconds, go for it, right? So this is what he writes. He says, humor was another of the soul's weapons in the fight for self-preservation. It is well known that humor, more than anything else in the human makeup, can afford an aloofness and an ability to rise above a situation, if even for a few seconds. Right? So one of the stories that was going around in the concentration camp was a story about a couple of Jewish guys who decide they're going to assassinate Hitler. And they happen to know he passes a certain turn in the road every morning about 10 o'clock with his entourage. They're going to be waiting there in the ditch with machine guns. They're going to jump up. They're going to get rid of Hitler. They're going to sacrifice their own lives. It's okay. They're going to get rid of Hitler. 10 o'clock comes around. Hitler doesn't show up. 10:15, still hasn't come by. 10:30, still hasn't gone by. 10:45, he's still not arrived. One guy turns to the other and says, "Gee, I hope nothing's happened to him." You see, that's what we mean by irony, of the situation. So, whether or not, depending on the attitude we have, it's a little bit like whether or not we're pessimists or optimists. We're going to be talking about mysticism this afternoon. You may have heard there are 2 different kinds of mystics. There's optimists and pessimists. So a pessimist is a person who, upon getting a clean bill of health from the doctor, wants a second opinion. A pessimist is a person who feels God probably loves him. He's just not ready to make a commitment. Pessimists, however, are not bad people. They're very good people to borrow money from, seeing how they really don't expect to get it back. Optimists, on the other hand, are the ones who are fun to be around. They see the good even in your misfortune. Don't you hate that? It's so good this happened to you. An optimist is a guy who, upon doing his laundry, discovers one lone sock and thinks he now has an extra one. An optimist is an 80-year-old guy who gets married and looks for a house near a school. Then there's the story of the optimistic merchant whose store was robbed. Somebody asked him if he lost much. He said, well, some of it would have been worse if they broke in the day before. Just after he marked everything down 20%. And then there's the optimist who was standing in front of the firing squad. Somebody asked him if he'd like to have a cigarette. He said no, he was trying to quit. So there's a doctor in India named Dr. Katari, who, upon discovering the healing power of humor, started what are called laughter clubs. Is there one on the Cape, I wonder? Does anybody know? Laughter yoga, yeah, it's the same idea, laughter yoga, right. I helped to start one in New York City back in 2003 and ran down a bunch of times to get that going. I'm going to give you a little demonstration at the end of our message for this morning, which we're getting very close to. But the thing is that it works, and you got to have the attitude. You got to rise above the situation, as we said, even if it's only for a few seconds. All right. So I want to share with you a couple of quotes, and then we'll close. And then I want to have a little demonstration of laughter yoga. This will be fun. Don't worry about it. Okay. This is from George Bernard Shaw. He says, "The older and the greater church to which I belong to is the church where the oftener you laugh, the better. Because by laughter only can you destroy evil without malice and affirm good friendship without mawkishness." And then finally, from A Course in Miracles, "Laugh at your fears and replace them with peace. For fear lies not in reality, but in the minds of children who do not understand reality." Thank you. Now, can we do 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes of demonstration on this. This is going to require that everybody get up and come into the aisles, come up in front, go back in the back. And Tony, come here and be my partner. Okay? Okay. Get it completely out of the aisles because you're going to be moving around, looking at each other, talking to each other. Okay?
Handheld mic.
Yeah, I guess. I can probably project on it.
Up against the wall.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, can you hold this for me for a second? We're just going to start by clapping our hands. We're going to go ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. 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 Okay, that's good. So we'll do like 4. This will about 30 seconds each on these. And at the end, I will start by doing ho, ho, ha, ha. That means it's time for you to stop doing what you were doing and do ho, ho, ha, ha with me. Okay? So the first one that we'll do, sometimes when you're walking on a carpet, you'll get a little electrical shock when you walk up to somebody. So we're going to reach out our hands like we're going to shake hands with somebody. You're going to pretend like you get a little electric. That's going to cause you to laugh. Okay? So just walk around now. Do that with a few people. So. Okay. Ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. 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 Okay, good. Thank you. So the next one, this is called the broken vase. And we're going to pretend, that you have a real expensive $20,000 Ming vase. And you're holding it, right? Actually, I had to do this once at an auction. And we're going to pretend that it slips out of your hands and falls to the floor. Okay? And when it falls from your hands, you're going to laugh. So it goes like this. Oh! Oh! Okay, we'll do that like that. You're holding the... oh, yeah. Oh! Oh! Okay, I'm going to... Oh, oh, oh. Ah! Ah! Oh, oh, oh! One more. Oh. All right. Now, there's a kind of a fine line sometimes between laughing and crying. Okay, so following the same line. What we're going to do is we're going to begin by kind of pretending that we're crying. And we're going to go down a little bit with our knees as we do that, and then we're going to come back up laughing. So it goes like this. According to that clock, we're running out of time. So one last one. This is one I made up. Well, remember the Wicked Witch from the West, from the Wizard of Oz? What we're going to do is we're going to go around and we're going to wiggle our finger at people's noses, not in the nose, just at the nose, you know. And we're going to do the Wicked Witch of the West laugh. Come on, Tony. All right, just walk in, find your. Okay, very good. Thank you. You can find your seats. Just one last thing. I know some of you were very good at the Wicked Witch. You've been practicing that?
Thanks again. Another hand for Jon Mundy. We're so happy to have him here. Thank you so much for all your laughter. We're not going to stop, by the way. We love to laugh around here.
You have been watching the message from our Sunday celebration service here at Unity on Cape Cod, providing a positive path for spiritual living. Please join us every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. at 147 Walton Ave, Hyannis, Mass. And visit us online at www.unityoncapecod.org.